Hello and welcome to today's episode of Old Man Energy. I'm your host, Flint Anderson. If you don't know that by now, then you're new here. If you are new here, then please go like, subscribe, and follow us to make sure you get all of our content. We are excited to have with us today a local author, well, local to me anyway, and I know local is subjective to whoever's listening to this. Gentleman I met in my hometown, grabbed his book after conversating for a little while. Then we just kind of kept in touch, and I invited him on the podcast when I finished his book. So, Jason, welcome. Will you give us a little more of an intro than that for us? Welcome to Old Man Energy.
Thank you. It was. I don't necessarily think that things happen by coincidence. So us crossing paths, I think, is an example of that. It was a pleasure to meet you. I overheard your conversation first, and was reluctant to jump in. You know, I'm sitting in the other corner, but I was compelled to, and you and I ended up having a great talk. I mean, about me, the short version is I grew up in Florida and spent 25 years in the military, and then moved back to Florida when I was finished with that career. Done a number of things since, and most recently, just this past year, published that book. So that is it's a compilation of a lot of thoughts that I've had and a lot of lessons that I've learned, and that's why I wrote it.
That is a very humble introduction, especially given the content of the book and some of the stories that you've shared. I got the book right after meeting him. I'm going to put the link in there, but I'll put it up on here right now. It's called Be a Boxer, Not a Fencer. And you say your last name, Doherty?
I say Doherty.
Doherty,
Mm-hmm.
Jason Doherty. We'll put the link in so you guys can go check it out. You want to read this book. It is not your typical self-help book. It's got, Jason shares a lot of stories, a lot of personal stories, and then a lot of reading that you wouldn't think that military guys do all that often. I know you served some time in the Marines and in the Army. I have a son who is Marine, and he doesn't, I think he thinks the way you do about certain things, but he doesn't read the way you do. It's interesting the take you have. What drove you to write the book? I mean, I would ask you what drove you to start reading, but I don't know if we can ever put a finger on that. So what drove you to write the book and share your story?
That's a great question, and I've always been a reader. I read my first book, I think, when I was like 4 years old, and I never stopped. And ultimately studied literature in college, and then creative writing in grad school. And so reading and writing and words have just always been part of my life. And people don't realize that, you know, I can't speak for all the services, but I know as a young guy in the Marine Corps, there is a by rank suggested or required reading list. And so they do encourage that. They encourage it at all ranks, not just officers or senior enlisted guys. They encourage that self-education process, which is something that I talk about in the book. You want to be an autodidact. One other thing that I would say about the book is that I am resistant to the idea of self-improvement in the way that I see it presented or marketed in a lot of ways in the culture right now. I think too often it's more about a kind of like cultural ego optimization versus the discovery of those things of absolute value. A lot of self-help has at its center definitively self as the prime reference point in the current cultural milieu. So I would suggest that self-denial is the path. And a lot of the reading I've done, the wisdom of the ages, so to speak, has confirmed that for me, and my personal experience has confirmed it as well. But the nuts and bolts of how I ended up getting a book published is that I had been thinking about how to take all of the things that I've read that are so intriguing to me, and specifically those things that I have not only read, but also put into practice in some way that have benefited me. How do I collect all of these things so that I put it in the foreword of the book, the kind of rhetorical question that, say, if my son or my daughter asked me what I thought about What are some ways in which you can behave, or what are resources you can tap into to live your best life? This book is the answer to that question. And so a lot of it's really me pointing people to different ways of finding out on their own. Because for me, I learned things the hard way, and and I have to learn them the way that I learn things. So I can't read a book or have somebody give me a salient piece of advice. I have to stumble through that process. It's not a straight line from the gutter to the right hand of God for me. I like to collect wisdom and then try it out. It's just kind of like it's like a workout program. You got to try it out. You can't read about it. I mean, reading about it and gaining knowledge is always good, but that's the first step. And that's where, as I point out, the difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. One is correct knowledge, one is correct action. And so is the marriage of those two things that results in discovering what the path that is in my best interest, which is also to say the path that is of the best interest to everybody in my life.
Can I interrupt you for a second? I'd like you to
Certainly.
clarify something. One thing I found very interesting was you speaking about orthodoxy and orthopraxy, and almost everybody's heard about orthodoxy, usually in a religious setting,
Mm-hmm.
but orthopraxy is not talked about as often. And just to clarify, when I read that particular part of the book, and when you were explaining, you did a good job of explaining it, and then I had to put it in terms of things that are implementable for me that I could remember. And I've used this quote since then. I just want to make sure it's on site. Orthodoxy would be the equivalent to a builder taking everything he needed to build a house to a job site and just never stop delivering supplies, but not actually acting on the actual building of the house. Orthopraxy would be taking what you've learned, which would be the supplies, and putting that into play. Not just continuing to read and to grow, but to actually take action on what you're learning moving forward. Did I understand that correctly, or did you have a different interpretation of that between the two?
No, that's a great analogy. Along those same lines, another way that I would think about it would be like, say, a guy who collects knowledge or facts, even trivia, so that he sounds smart at a business meeting or sounds interesting at a cocktail party, versus somebody who studies and collects that information because he or she wants to conform or align with something higher or a better version of what they're doing now. And so the result is like say the motivation is different, right? Um, I mean, there are a lot of analogies. Yours is a good one because knowledge of any kind really is. It would be like somebody goes through, medical school, and we've all had this experience with doctors. You got a guy who went to, say, even the best medical school in the country. Well, that doctor's not the same as the doctor who went to the best or not the best medical school, but has 20 years of experience treating the condition that you're suffering from. There's something to be said for getting your hands dirty, right? And so, that speaks also to phenomenology, which I talk a little bit about as one kind of slice of the philosophical pie. Phenomenology is truth learned through experience. It's the difference between, say, head knowledge and heart knowledge. Heart knowledge comes through experience. And I may have academically known something, and then life taught me a lesson. Now I know it. It's different.
You know it in a way that will not will not
Right.
ever forget.
And is I hate to, I'm reluctant to use the word impossible, but there are certain things that cannot be transferred through just knowledge alone. In terms of, say, think of it academically. There are just certain things that I can tell my children, or try to tell, say, a young guy that I'm mentoring, or anybody. I can say, hey, this is what happened to me. I can share my experience, but he's not really going to know until he experiences it himself. A great example is the first time you get your heart broken. I can tell you all about it, but you don't know what that means until it happens to you.
I would go so far as to say that's a good analogy, and also the first time you get punched in the face.
Yeah, exactly. Tell you what it's like.
It is not the same thing.
Right.
So I was
Yeah,
telling my
that's great.
children in that vein. It was like there are certain learn as much as you can from other people's experience, but there are certain things that you just can't learn from other people's experience. And
Yeah,
those are two
exactly.
really powerful examples of that. You've mentioned a couple of times, both in our conversations and alluded to it in this podcast already, the influence of Stoicism on your philosophy in your book. Can you expand more
Mhm.
on that and what you believe the basic or the most important tenets are?
Uh, Absolutely. Discovered Stoicism through the writings of Admiral James Stockdale, who, for the older folks watching or listening, was Ross Perot's presidential running mate. At the time, that was toward the twilight of his life and career. And so the people who only know him from that don't know the real Jim Stockdale, because he was beginning to wane, uh, maybe intellectually. People might not have a great impression if they remember him just only from that era. But he was shot down as a pilot in Vietnam and spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton. And he credits his survival there and the leadership that he was able to display during his time there. He's a senior ranking officer. And so he was responsible for the other prisoners in that way. And he credits his survival there to the philosophy that he studied in grad school, which, interestingly, the Navy didn't send him to grad school to study philosophy, but he was so smart that he finished and had like 6 months on his hands. He finished early. So he started auditing classes, as I remember it, and he came across a philosopher named, some people say Epictetus. I always call him Epictetus, but he was a Roman slave who earned his freedom by becoming a philosopher. And Epictetus is an interesting guy, to say the least. So in the writings of Stockdale, I learned about Epictetus, and then later about Marcus Aurelius. And his book, Meditations, is kind of a book I've carried in my rucksack for a really long time. Just one of those, you always have three, maybe four you take with you everywhere you go. And that was one of them. And I can sum it up, what it's meant to me, and why it's been beneficial, even though it has its limitations, I think. But as a tool, it boils things down to what you control and what you cannot control. And we have a tendency to think that we can control a lot more than we can. So the limit of my control really ends at the boundary of my own skin, meaning that everything beyond the reach of my fingertips is beyond my control. And there is nothing I can do about it. So the sooner I come to terms with that, well, I can shift my focus from trying to make the world a place that I want to live in. I can shift that focus back to myself and make me the type of person who's capable of living in the world regardless of what it dishes out. Right? It's that like old proverb that, when faced with 1,000 miles of rocky path, I could try to cover that path with leather, or I could make myself a pair of sandals, something like that. And so one thing I like about Stoicism too is that it is concerned with the common good. So even though the focus is on oneself and what I can control, really it's for the benefit of everybody, right? It's not to make me, it's not to raise me in stature or reputation or wealth or power or any of those things. And, reading a Roman emperor who was literally in charge of the world, writing about common good, you need some context for that. This is the guy that could have anything he wanted and resisted that for something higher and more important. So beyond what you can control and what you can't, Stoicism talks about really three relationships: your relationship with yourself, your relationship with the gods, they would say, the divine or the source of all things, and your relationship with the people around you. It's three things. And what Aurelius says again and again is that those things that, say, those first principles or those things you believe in must be few and foundational and you must return to them often. And everything else you put in the big basket of either I can't control it or it's irrelevant.
And you see examples of this in a lot. I say a lot in many of the more powerful, authentic leaders of today, or people that are more public in today, that a few different principles are what you need to return to. I know Ed Milet talks about it as the power of one more. So you don't have to do 1,000 things better. You just have to try just a little bit more, add one more thing to it, which is a very small percentage. Frisella talks about the power list. If you try and do more than 5 things in a day, you're not going to
Yeah.
accomplish any of them very well. So it translates in different ways. One thing that you said repeatedly through your book, and actually in the intake for the podcast, was self-denial equals freedom, which ties into that as well. Can you expand on that and tell us what that's meant for you personally and how that can translate into the listeners' lives?
That's for me, that's been a long road figuring that out. And in the military, you're put in a lot of situations, training and otherwise, training and missions and deployments and the whole thing where you don't have creature comforts, things are austere, people are hard on you. You do a bunch of hard stuff. You try to survive and graduate or survive, period, whatever it is, right? There's a marked difference between those periods, say, of deprivation or austerity that are externally imposed and discovering that internal self-denial has intrinsic value. So years ago, Jocko Willink, the beast of a man named Seal, wrote a book called Discipline Equals Freedom. And he had a lot of good things to say in there. And I was like, yep, got it. Like, I know exactly what you're saying, man. And
I felt the same way after reading that
yeah,
book.
I mean, it's, he has a great way of just very simply and directly capturing a lot of those lessons that you kind of learn either through osmosis or, you're part of the machine, in the military, and you learn a lot of stuff. For me, though, I kind of say, dovetailing on the way he put it, is that discipline is freedom. Well, discipline really is self-denial. Self-discipline is self-denial. So that's one way to think of it. And it does equate to freedom. So to define what freedom is, here's a great example. And I, use something similar to this in the book, but freedom might be my ability to play a song on the piano. Freedom for me, like, I'm not free to play anything on the piano because I don't know how to play the piano, right? Or I'm not free to lift 500 pounds off the ground because I'm not strong enough to do it. I don't know how to do it, and I'm not strong enough to do it. So if you think about those kind of as say, pathways to the freedom to be a certain thing, the type of person who can play a song on the piano or lift 500 pounds, well, that requires a great deal of self-discipline to get there. The 500 pounds analogy is one that's easy to understand, especially for guys like us, that dabble around with fitness. And because it requires an entire reordering of my life. So if you think about a beginning lifter, they're a great example because they will make tremendous gains in quick time. You talk about old, well, we don't make tremendous gains. We don't do anything tremendous in quick time,
No.
right? Everything's incremental. Well, character is that way, right? So we will be incrementally become the things that we become, whether those are healthy things or not. You don't wake up one day 50 pounds overweight. You gain 1 pound at a time. You don't wake up 50 pounds stronger. You get 50 pounds stronger one pound at a time. And so across myriad domains, whether it's, everybody talks about nutrition and vitamins and working out and all that kind of stuff. But it always boils down to a trade-off. And what self-discipline is choosing tomorrow over today.
I want to take a minute to interject something in here.
Yeah.
one thing that one and this is for those of you that are just starting out on your journey, maybe a young man or young person who's just growing up and realizing that there's a better way to live than what you were taught, or maybe it's someone who's in middle age that just realized that they lived a lie their whole life and they want to take control. Either way, when you're a beginner, it's going to feel overwhelming because you see all these guys and we talk about discipline and we talk about self growth and denial and this and that. Nothing we're talking about here is an inherent talent.
Mm,
Discipline is literally just applied force of will over time. That's it. You choose
yeah.
today to do what you need to do. You choose tomorrow to do what you need to do. And it references back to what Jason was talking about, where making those choices repeatedly and consistently, you change who you are, you change what you look like, you change what you can do. But the discipline doesn't, you just don't wake up one day and go, I've had discipline for a long time. You wake up one day
Hmm.
and decide to do what you need to do that day and again and again. All of these things are learnable and teachable. And unfortunately, most of what you hear out there is going to overwhelm you, and you don't need it anyway. You just need some very
Hmm.
basic directives that you decide on how you're going to live your life moving forward.
I'm glad you said that, Flint, because it's a concept that I expound on a bit in the book. I had a buddy of mine, the night clerk. He has done. He and I were young guys together in the Marines, and as long as I've known this cat, 30 years now, he does an annual review of his own life. And he's the first one to introduce me to the idea of start one, stop one. Start one thing, stop one thing. There's another way that I put it. It's like the one rep method, meaning that so if I'm doing push-ups, I'm going to do them one rep at a time. I can only do the rep I'm doing. I can only ever do the rep I'm doing, right? And so it is focusing. The ones that are done, and the ones that are coming up, I can't do them until I complete the one I'm doing. And so a lot of times, when I used to say coach people in fitness, um, they'd come to me for nutritional advice. And I'd say, all right, write everything that you eat or drink down for 3 days and bring it back to me. What I found consistently was that people eat too much sugar. So I just say, stop eating sugar. I can remember one case where a guy was drinking, the cat was drinking about 118 ounces of Mountain Dew every day,
Oh my
or
God.
drinking it. Yeah. And so I just said, hey, you don't need to go on a diet, dude. You need to stop drinking Mountain Dew. So he did, and he lost like 7 pounds in 10 days, you
I have a
know?
question about not the Mountain Dew part because I've struggled
Yeah.
with diet Mountain Dew because of caffeine intake, but that's
And
another
it's
thing.
delicious.
It is delicious. That's the problem.
Yeah,
Um,
it's refreshing.
when I've helped people and coached people in fitness, and that's pretty much a standard tenet. It's like, okay, well, we got to figure out where to start from. So write everything down that you eat or drink for the next 3 days. Their log gets much better by the third day because just the physical act of having to write down what they're eating and
Right.
drinking makes
Yeah.
them think.
Yep. But you're right on with the concept, because it's like you can't you can't fix your whole life, man. It's overwhelming. Like even if you feel like you're doing all right, but then you start thinking, well, I could probably, I could aim higher, I could do better. Man, we have so many components to our lives that it's like, where do you start? That's why maybe starting one thing and maybe stopping one thing is an easy way to do it. And then you're not on a timeline. Like this is, it's not like I used to be super hard on myself. I'd be like, all right, dude, you're going to quit 5 things and you're going to execute, execute, execute. You got to get all this shit done in 30 days. And, it's like you're constantly like, man, I talk about sometimes the long view. Take the long view. And a good way to think about that is that you'll see, like, say 6-pack abs in 6 minutes, or add 50 pounds to your bench press in 30 days. Like crap like that, man, discard that thinking altogether. Because it's like, man, if I want to get stronger in a certain way, if I think about it over a year, it's better math, right? And I could say, all right, I can, if I got 1 pound stronger a week, I'd add 52 pounds of strength to whatever every single year. That's 1 pound stronger a week. Anybody can do that, man.
which is doable.
And, yeah, and I like how you point out too that this isn't. You don't have to be special. Like you don't have to have any kind of talent. You don't really even have to have any kind of education. We can all take a look around. We can look around our own bedroom, our kitchen. Is your truck dirty? Maybe just wash your truck. Yeah. So it's a step in the right direction. Like take something that ain't quite right and just make it better.
The Jordan Peterson says, take something you could do that you would do, and just do that. Start there.
Exactly.
That's
And add to it. And this is a great segue to the idea of via negativa. Because I'm convinced that, well, when I say convinced, my experience has taught me that most good is simply the absence of bad. And what I mean by that is that I'll just speak for myself. I have a tendency to say, complain about circumstances or complain about failures or complain about not measuring up in some way, to a standard that I've set for myself. And really, what I've done is I've limited myself in some way because of maybe just a bad habit. Maybe if I got up a little bit earlier, I could accomplish that thing. Maybe if I didn't procrastinate, I could get more done. Sometimes it's a big thing. I talked about this in the book, and I don't really get into details because a big thing could be different for everybody. But a great example is somebody who has an addiction of some kind, right? And that can be an addiction to anything, to electronics, to booze, to sugar, to whatever, right? And I feel like I'm really trying hard and I just can't get there. Well, take a look at that thing that prevents you from getting there. Make a list of things. Just make a list of kind of bad habits. It's a great place to start because the removal of those things, or maybe you have somebody toxic in your life. Maybe you're working a job and you absolutely hate it, right? Maybe if you just got a different job, your entire life would change. Or if maybe you have some kind of nagging guilt about something that you did in the past and you never made it right. And so now you don't feel like you deserve success. It's kind of like even in the Bible it says that you're gonna make a sacrifice to God and then you remember that you did your brother wrong. It says leave your sacrifice at the altar. God doesn't want it. Go fix that relationship. Like make amends. There are all kinds of things that hold us back. Things that we haven't done or things that we continue to do habitually. If we address those things, that's a great way to improve your life.
I want to add to that, making amends. If you can do it, if you've wronged a person and can go make amends with that person, then that's one thing that's very easy to do. But sometimes make amends just means coming to terms with that memory and actually turning it into a memory instead of an active source of pain. Because sometimes you can't always go back
Great
and
point.
do what you've done. I'll
Right.
refer to Peterson again. He talks about this. If it's over 18 months old and it still has an emotional reaction whenever you bring it up, you have not effectively dealt with that. But dealing with it
Yeah.
can be different on different levels. If you've acted badly in the past or done something in the past that you're not proud of, it does not mean you have to continue to suffer for that moving forward. You can learn from it, move on, and it becomes just a memory at that point. It's important to deal with your past, no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm. I think Oscar Wilde said something like, he had a quote, and I think he said, never judge people too harshly because every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And the thing that I've taken from that is that it applies to me too.
Don't spend a long time. Don't continue to make a mistake just because you spend a long time making it.
Exactly.
And
It's kind of like you could start your day over anytime you want.
Let's start your life over
Yeah,
anytime you want. And I like you
exactly.
referenced the fact that a big deal is a different thing to different people. My wife and I had this discussion about the recent killing of the United Healthcare CEO, and they were trying
Oh
to
yeah.
use United Healthcare patients' claims that have been denied to research as who did it when they were searching for him initially, and they couldn't figure it out. But they were trying to, okay, well, who was denied on a huge claim or this or that, and we got to discussing that, and not the fact that the tragedy happened, but the fact that it could have been something very small in the
Hmm.
insurance world, and that's life changing to one person. It would be impossible to search that because it may be a $1,500 price that they declined, and it costs someone their mother or their father or the medication that they needed. So we don't get to judge what everybody else is going through. Something
Hmm.
that may be a small just bump in the road for somebody like you or I could be something seemingly unsurmountable for somebody else
Hmm.
because they don't know how to get through it. So don't feel like your problems are small or huge just because you're the only one dealing with them. If you have somebody that you trust in your life to talk about it, which is hard enough as guys, we understand that too. Talk about your problems with them and things that are challenging you because all of this stuff is awesome as far as being able to change your life and be able to do it. But if you have something that occupies your mental space to the point where you can't think of anything else and it excludes everything, even your day to day operations, you need to find out why it's got that much control over you and bring in somebody that you trust outside to help you overcome that. And there's no shame in asking somebody for help at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's an idea that I fitted from that I have to get over myself, but I can't get over myself by myself. Connection, rich, honest, true connection with other people it's essential. Like you have to have a confidant. You have to have uh, like-minded people who encourage you on whatever path it is that you've chosen that you think right now is your say highest aim or say the best effort that you can make in any given moment. Having people that support that is essential because otherwise, I mean, you see it a lot of times when a guy wants to get healthy or a guy wants to go to college or whatever, and his friend group isn't they're not on board. Right. And so in all of these cases, a lot of times it will boil down to some tough decisions because you have to prioritize. Somebody one time said, show me your five best friends and I can predict the future. And so not only does the connection or your sphere of people influence who you are and either help you excel or hold you back, but the quality of those relationships is also what determines whether or not you feel like you have to go it alone. Hey, listen, it's easy to romanticize the lone wolf, like, man, I can do this. Pull myself up on my bootstraps. I'll climb that mountain. I'll kill all the wild animals. I'll do some amazing stuff. Everybody be super proud of me, man. But we can't do it alone, man. And when you start talking about making decisions around self-discipline or improvement or stopping bad habits or whatever it is, I mean, it can feel pretty lonely because you have to make decisions for yourself, and you do have to make them for yourself. Like I can't decide for you, and you can't decide for me. But being selective about who you share things with and um, who you build trust with it's really important because it determines how successful we're going to be.
One thing nobody can do for you is give you the stones to reach out and make those connections. I mean, we'll
Yeah.
refer back to the beginning of this podcast where we were just sitting in a waiting room, and I was talking to
Hmm.
somebody else who actually didn't that connection didn't even work out. That guy never even responded. But
Yeah.
Jason had the guts to step up and say, "Hey, you know what?" Even though he was reluctant at first. And so you never know where those connections are going to come from, but you've got to be able to take that first step, and nobody can do that for you. Luckily, it's just a
Hmm.
choice. You got to be willing to have some people look at you like, well, they might think I'm weird. Well, so what? You're never going to talk to them again anyway. Who cares?
Yeah.
So there's
That's
another reason.
that's where stoicism comes in handy
It really does. It
because
really
you're not worried about it.
it's like, oh, okay, well, he might think I'm weird, but you know what? He might not. He might end up making a connection. And I'll tell you this, Jason and I haven't talked much back and forth between here. I mean, a little bit, maybe a text message here or there while I was reading the book. I wanted to finish the book before we had the podcast. But like you said at the beginning, that there's not a lot of coincidences that happen. And I think coincidence is just the sum of enough things happening that we pick the ones that matter and we think that, oh, there's divine intervention there. There might be divine intervention. I don't know. But we never could have predicted that at all, sitting in that
No.
waiting room and say, okay, well, hey, there's this. And it actually came from a mistake, because when you mentioned Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius, I thought you were talking about just Stoicism in general. You were actually talking about your book. So if I hadn't had the guts to come back and go, you know what, I was wrong. I haven't read your book. I thought I had. Ended up buying it. So it was like,
Like, I wrote a ton of books, and I'm
yeah,
like,
being
have
willing.
you read this one?
Yeah, I've read a lot of books. Another thing too is, don't be afraid to cross those boundaries that you have made up in your head about, oh, well, maybe they're too wealthy, they wouldn't want to be friends with me, or, oh, that's a military guy, he wouldn't want to be friends with me because I never did the military. Quit making other people's decisions for them. Jason and I have very similar philosophies about life in general, and if this podcast doesn't point that out, then not much will. From completely different backgrounds. You went to college and graduated, military service, and I went to college and dropped out, became an entrepreneur, a corporate background. We arrived here completely differently. We haven't even gotten into socioeconomic or where we came from as children, but I'm willing to bet that that's a little different as well. But your friendships don't have to come from your socioeconomic group or your group of high school buddies that were there. They will change over time. You mentioned the 5 friends and I'll show you your future. Well, you can cultivate those 5 friends. You don't have to have the ones by accident and go, oh, I guess I'm going to drink beer and watch the game every Sunday because that's what my friends do. Sucks to be me. Wish I had a better life. It's up to you to cultivate those friendships and move them forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So we have a question for you. What are you reading right now? Because we've talked a lot about this. I have another question on what you wrote on the intake form, but what are you reading right now?
I'm reading more than one thing, which is typically how it goes with me.
Listeners are used to that.
Yeah, I am reading We Who Wrestle with God, Jordan Peterson. I'm also reading a book published by some scholars who did like I don't want to say investigative reporting, but they basically spent these professors spent like 18 months with the Amish. And so I'm reading, it's a textbook basically about the Amish, where they came from, all the history, how they do what they do. I mean, it's a full breakdown of everything about it, but it's just super interesting to me. I'm reading Synchronicity by Carl Jung, on and off, and those are the main ones. I have a stack of.
Yeah, there's certain authors out there that you have to take in pieces. Carl Jung, Nassim Taleb. I can only read a short portion of his books at a time. The Black Swan.
Taleb's the man.
He is so smart. I feel like when Joe Rogan's talking to Elon Musk, he goes, "I must be his dumbest friend."
Yeah,
Taleb,
yeah.
man, it's just hard to process everything that got put into his books. My goodness.
Yeah, and I have heard him say in an interview that he doesn't write anything that he can't write off the top of his head. Which, if you read anything that he's written, is amazing. If he can't reference it, quote it, he doesn't know it by heart, he doesn't put it in a book. So when you're reading the stuff that he's writing, I mean, he doesn't have a stack of books that he's, copying and pasting or referencing people or whatever. I mean, this is stuff he believes and knows inside and out. It's amazing.
And you can tell by the way he writes it, because his books are some of the few ones that you can stop, put down for a month, pick up, and go right back exactly where you left off and not have to catch back up again.
And I was blown away when he talked about via negativa. I mean, I had discovered that prior in another, like an anthology that I have called Less is More. I reference that book. But, Taleb makes the claim that he says something like 100 affirmations of a thing don't make it true, but a single negation of a thing makes it not true. And then he explains the logic of it, mathematically, scientifically, whatever, how the negative is more powerful than the positive.
And you know, something just dawned on me with that, and I remember that now that you mention it. It didn't have quite the same impact on me, although I think it should have, but as it did with you. But I hadn't studied via negativity before that. It's that seems backwards. It's true, but it seems backwards in and of the fact that our subconscious can't process the negative. It can only process literal interpretation. So if I tell you don't think of a pink elephant, you just thought of a pink elephant because
Right.
it completely ignored that. So there's something there, and that's just a thought that just popped into my head. I haven't explored that at all, but that would be interesting to look at those two concepts side by side and see how they
Another,
align.
dang, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, there was another way to think about via negativity that was helpful for me. Hopefully it'll come to me.
Okay. Well, one quote you put on here that you wanted to talk about, and I really want to hear your interpretation of this. Is you said success is found under your alarm clock. Talk to
Yeah.
us about that. And for the record, both of us get up stupid early in the morning. In fact, most of the times I've
Yes.
talked to him has been insanely early before everybody else gets awake.
Right. It's a Benjamin Franklin quote. Yeah, and it's in my life. It speaks to creating a creating a rhythm where you start your day by investing in yourself and your day. And so my mornings I do get up early, and I've gotten up increasingly earlier, as through my 30s, 40s, now 52. So, in the military, you get up early all the time. I can remember, having to get up at 5:30 or 6 and thinking like, geez, and then it's like you have to be in formation at 6. Now you're getting up at 5. And now I get up at 3:30 or 4. And so part of that is that if there are things that are of value that I want to invest in life, the way our culture is structured, there are very few hours in a day where we are not subject to the onslaught of the demands of others. If I want something, I have to make time for it. And for me, and for a lot of people I know, and it tends to be the way our Western culture functions, those early hours, that's the time when you can find it. It's when I read, it's when I meditate, it's when I train, it's when I catch up on something, it's when I think about things, not of them, and it's quiet.
Peace.
It's quiet. Yep. And so we're surrounded by noise and distraction all the time. It's very difficult to escape in the culture in which we live, and I've seen that globally too. I mean, even I've spent some time in some places where it's a slower pace, it's a slower time. I discovered that reading about the Amish. They still govern their time by the seasons. Right? That's an ancient way of doing it. The ancient Hebrews, it was the lunar cycle, right? And so we are governed by seconds now and split seconds. There's that study that was done about the length of screenshots or an angle held in a film, how that has decreased over time. And it's gone from something like 3 minutes with the camera angle being steady to 3 seconds in most movies now. Like, it's constant change, constant stimulation, constant distraction. And so the mornings, you don't have that. They can be whatever you want them to be.
And take everything he just said and write it down, because that's the number one most powerful thing you can choose to do tomorrow to change your life, is because we all get the same 24 hours. It doesn't matter. The richest person in the world and the poorest person in the world get the exact same 24 hours, and how they spend them is up to them.
Yes.
Taking that time early in the morning when your brain is fresh to do the things you want to do is massively important. That's the reason I chose to start getting up that early. And it makes a difference. It makes a difference in the whole timbre of my day. If for some reason, if I'm sick, if I've slept in, maybe I didn't get to bed till late the night before, and I miss that time in the morning, the whole day feels off. Now, you can choose not to make it be a bad day. It's like, okay, well, I missed it. I'll be there tomorrow. But it still feels off. It's different. And we've spent about 45 minutes talking about ways to improve your life and practical application, how to improve your life, how you've done it. I've shared some of my story. And if you're still with us at this point, thank you. We appreciate you guys watching us. It's been almost an hour. And Jason, I'm going to ask you, because we are out of time, we're going to have to do another podcast. I think we could probably sit here and talk for 3 or 4 hours.
Easy, man.
If you were going to leave the listeners with the advice that you wish you had been given or had listened to sooner, what would it be?
I'll leave you with a Bruce Lee quote. All mastery runs to simplicity.
That's a great quote. And it's very easy to understand. It doesn't require a lot of thought.
Don't complicate it.
No, don't overthink it. And I'm gonna leave you guys with his quote, and I'm gonna leave you guys with this: is don't overthink the things you need to do. Just start doing something about them every day. The sooner you do that, the sooner you figure out what you actually need to be doing about them, and it makes your tasks that much easier. If you do not already like and subscribe to the Old Man Energy podcast, make sure you do that. Hit that bell to get notified, and follow me on all different platforms of social media, because I give you different content almost daily. I've got the link down below to Jason's book, and I just want to say again, thank you, Jason, for joining us and taking time out of your day. This has been one of the best podcasts I know for me that I've done in a long time, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on, man. I'm glad we met, and I'm looking forward to talking some more.
I am too, brother.
Yeah.
Hey,
thank you.
Love y'all.